Hey there, James Roebuck here, and this is my review of Positioning by Ries and Jack Trout. The Battle for Your Mind, How to Be Seen and Heard in an Overcrowded Marketplace. So this is actually the second time I've read this book. It was recommended to me by Eben Pagan, who I've talked about in these videos before. This book is a special one because it was originally written in 1981. And at that time, it was hailed as one of the most important marketing books. So what's really interesting about reading this book is almost all of the examples that Jack and Al use are from the 1960s and 70s. And what's remarkable is that all of the principles are still the same today. First off, what I found really interesting about reading this book is how in the introduction they talk about how crowded the advertising space is. This is all during the heyday of network television, before cable really took off big time. And they're talking about how it used to be all radio and then it was all print, and now more and more advertising market share is being taken by television. So this book was written way pre-internet, and it's still so relevant today because the principles that they teach in this book are the principles of marketing psychology. So I'm going to go into a few things that I thought were really interesting about this book. So even back in 1981, these guys were talking about how our society has become totally over-communicated. And advertising and marketing is one thing, but positioning your advertising is the way to be heard in a totally over-communicated market. They say that like in the heyday of Madison Avenue style advertising and marketing, it was all about creativity. It was about coming up with something catchy or memorable to get into a prospect's mind and then help them make a buying decision. But even back at the end of the 1970s, our society was so over-communicated that these guys say that that style of creative marketing is no longer able to cut it. They say today, 1981's today, today's marketplace is so over-communicated that the strategies of the past just won't work anymore. There's too many products and too many companies. They say now, 1981 now, advertising can no longer act like a sledgehammer, and it has to be like a fog, something that slowly infiltrates the prospect's mind. The way to do this is to be very selective and concentrate on a very small segment of a market. And this is what they coin as positioning. They talk about how the human mind can literally only receive and accept a certain amount of information. There's a rule of sevens in there. They say that the typical consumer can only name 7 products of a certain type. So 7 car rental companies, 7 different types of soda, 7 different types of cereal before they run out. Apparently this is why phone numbers are 7 digits long. So there's generally 2 ways to penetrate through all this noise. One of them is being first. What that means is if you're not first in your market, if you're not first in your niche, you're nobody. Now what's important here is that you have to be first into your prospect's mind. In this book, they talk about brands like Kleenex, Kodak, Xerox, and Coca-Cola. Even back in 1980, those were the massively dominant brands that got into prospects' minds as the first and the only product. Kleenex means tissue, Coke means cola, Xerox means copiers, Kodak means photography. It's really incredible to read a almost 40-year-old book and have them use those types of examples that are still totally relevant today. Kleenex is still Kleenex today, and of course so is Coca-Cola. So these are all examples of brands that were the first into a prospect's mind. So they go on to say that if you're not first, don't even bother, don't even try. You have 2 options. Either stop and do something completely different, or position your product or your brand differently so that it creates a different niche, so that you're going after a different, very small segmentation, and then you can be first in that segmentation. The other way to position a product in a very noisy environment is to position it against one of your competitors. So if you're not first in the prospect's mind, you can actually use the #1 brand's clout to position your product. They have an example talking about Milk Duds in this book, and I really like that one. I'll run through it with you now. So Milk Duds at some point a long time ago was really popular with the movie-going crowd, so I guess like teens. But it wasn't too popular with the younger crowd. Now, Milk Duds obviously saw an opportunity because if you get loyal users and consumers at a young age, they'll continue to grow loving your product. So they wanted to go after young kids. At the time, Hershey's chocolate bars were the most popular candy bar. So a brand like Milk Duds, which was not very well known within that demographic they were going after, they had absolutely no chance of outspending or outbranding the Hershey's chocolate bar. So it wasn't even worth trying. So what they did is they went out and did some market research and found out a weakness in the Hershey's brand. Apparently, as years went on, the Hershey's chocolate bar ended up getting smaller and smaller and smaller so that Hershey's could make more money off of less chocolate. So Milk Duds decided to capitalize on this weakness. And they focused in on, because a Hershey's bar was small, it didn't last very long. So if a kid wanted to, they could spend 50 cents on a Hershey's chocolate bar and then mouth through it in just seconds. But if they were to try Milk Duds, for the same price, they get 15 individual, slow-eating, chocolate-covered caramels. They marketed that you couldn't even eat them quickly if you wanted to because it would seal your jaw shut. So they positioned Milk Duds against the leader, Hershey's bar, to have more value because it was longer lasting and they got more bang for their buck. Or their cents. The outcome was that the company sold more Milk Duds than they ever had before and took a portion of the market share away from Hershey's. And the important takeaway from this is that Milk Duds, what they did is they didn't find a problem with the candy bar. They weren't going directly after the number one saying chocolate bars are bad. You shouldn't buy them, you should buy Milk Duds instead. What they went after was a problem in the prospect's mind. Kids thinking that their value was shrinking every time the Hershey's chocolate bar got smaller. Anyways, there are tons and tons of examples in this book of really prolific marketing campaigns. It's really interesting to read, hearing about all these marketing juggernauts of the past, some of them still relevant, some of them not even recognizable. But I'm starting to see a lot of linear similarities in all these sorts of things that I'm reading. I realized a little while ago that with all this information that I'm consuming, a lot of it is the same, but packaged differently. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's a really good idea to get many different people's, different experts' perspectives. And if anything, in me, it gives me confidence that what I'm reading, what I'm learning is real and true. And that's what's so compelling about a 40-year-old book written about advertising techniques that are 60 years old that is still relevant today. But when I read in positioning about how it's so important to be number one in a new market, it makes me think of what Gary Vee said, how it's really important to explore different social media platforms. Gary Vee has an entire chapter in his book, Crushing It, all about Musical.ly. And he straight up says that he's been wrong about this stuff before. He doesn't know if it's going to be the next big thing, but if it is, you invest your time now and then you can have a huge influence on this new platform, which could be the next Instagram. Another thing that they say in positioning that totally lines up with the book that I read 2 weeks ago called Expert Secrets is this, is that the mind only accepts new information if it matches or lines up with prior knowledge. This goes right along with Russell Brunson's false beliefs. People don't like buying improvements. They like buying new opportunities. And in order to position a new opportunity properly, you have to break down false beliefs. These false beliefs are prior knowledge or prior experience that a prospect has about your product or your niche. And you have to break those down and convince them otherwise before you can introduce your new opportunity. So if you're taking part in any sort of marketing, I would breeze through a copy of Positioning. It's got some really succinct and useful information about the psychology behind advertising. And it's a kind of a fun read because you get a look into advertising of the past and some products of the past. This week, I'm going to be reading Hardwiring Happiness, the new brain science of contentment, calm, and confidence. I was watching a YouTube video about happiness and the YouTube guy recommended this author, Rick Hanson. So I'm gonna check this out. It actually caught my interest because when I was reading The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck last week, Mark Manson touches on Buddhism. And this guy has written a book previous to this all about Buddhism. I decided to pick up this one because it's the newer version. So we'll see. In a week from now, I'm gonna be all hardwired and happy. Look out for this review next week. I'll see you then.